Good evening and welcome to our webinar for Are You OK Day. We're going to be talking tonight about how to build resilience coming out of lockdown. And so we're going to throw to a conversation that we had earlier with a psychologist and a counsellor. But we would love for you guys at home to be interacting with us, talking in the chat, and please be asking any questions that you might have because we'll be having a live Q&A right after this. But let's have a look at what went on earlier. Good evening, City Life Church. It is Are You OK Day today, and we are going to be having a couple of special guests with us. I'm going to be talking tonight about building resilience post-restriction. But before we do, we'd like to acknowledge that we are on the traditional land of the Bunurong and Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation, and we pay respect to the elders past, present and future. Today we have with us Pat, who's a counsellor, and Scott, who's a clinical psychologist. Thank you guys so much for being here and being able to talk about this. Yeah. Now, we are going to be talking about building resilience, but we just want to acknowledge the fact that we can't cover every single topic here. This is going to be a very broad overview. But our prayer and our hope is that you guys will be able to take away a few of the gems and also be able to feel equipped and empowered to be able to seek a further help if need be. So just the first question that I have is, why do you think some people have come out of lockdowns and come out of restrictions feeling quite emotionally, physically or spiritually drained?
Well, I think there's, a whole heap of reasons. I mean, for one thing, there was so much change. Like we know every other day there was something new, right? And so that takes a lot of energy, takes a lot of focus, for parents, there were kids at home, and a lot of people were juggling work and school and all these things. And we could talk about even things like routines and these things that often really kind of help with our energy levels. So many of those things went out the window, I think. And just, I guess, a sense of disconnection from people. Like we don't do very well isolated, and that's why community is really important. And for a lot of people, that connection was really difficult because of all the the things that came with that season.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I think I would add, it was a great loss for many people. While some gained from it, there was a loss of power, there was a loss of purpose. Some people became very fearful, some young, old, fearful about the future. What does this mean? Some became very angry on the other side of the spectrum, if you like. But in all of us, there was independence was curtailed. So even if we like to be alone or like to be really out with everybody else, we were curtailed and it was out of our control. And I think that sense of, hey, I have a right, actually, no, you don't, was very hard.
Yeah. And my next question was going to be, who do you think has been the most affected? But it does sound like everybody is affected, but maybe on different levels. But who do you think would be then the most affected with feeling isolated or feeling emotionally, spiritually, physically drained? Biggest mental health impact?
I think it affected, like everyone, like you said, in different ways. Like when I think of young people that I've worked with or, kids in school, especially kids at milestones, like the kids that were just going into high school or the kids that were just starting school or, they were in this transitional phase. I think perhaps they got impacted a little more than some others. Even things like year 9 into year 9's like quite a critical time as well. So some of those key points, and likewise in some of the people becoming parents in different kinds of transitions, people saying goodbye to people. There were so many of those transition moments that got interrupted and they didn't get to engage in it in a way that we might usually do it, which came with, some cost to that.
Yeah, I think you've covered that well. And I think I know research says that a lot of the youth and younger people were greatly affected. I think sometimes with the older people, it's not recorded or it's not identified. So a lot of people are aware that, what's wrong with me? I don't want to do what I used to do, or, I'm really struggling, what's going to happen now sort of thing, or I'm angry because I couldn't be there when someone died or the birth of a child or significant events.
Yeah.
And not really knowing how to process that, how to identify it, admit it, and then how do you then walk it out?
Yeah. And I think it's really important for us to be talking about like who's affected, because like we were talking about before, like different people are affected differently. Like you were talking about, some people have lost, some people have gained. And just thinking about like, my own situation in family, we might not have felt the effects of mental health, but hearing statistics in the news, like saying things like there is a youth mental health crisis or epidemic, and saying, you know what, if us at City Life Church, we're a Christian organisation, we're a Christian faith-based community, and we want our heart to beat for what God's heart beats for. We want our heart to bleed for what God's heart bleeds for. So when it comes to things that the community is struggling with, even if we're not personally struggling with it, it's good for us to know this, to be aware of this, and to be able to help out where need be. Do you guys mind if I share a couple of statistics?
No.
Go for it.
The National Mental Health Survey revealed the annual mental health illness, the prevalence of mental health illness in 16 to 24-year-olds had surged from 26% in 2007 to 39% in 2020 and 21. And so an unprecedented increase of 50% in 15 years. And it was just talking, there's lots of statistics about the changes in mental health during COVID. 42% said that their mental health had actually suffered or worsened during COVID. So a lot of people have been feeling, uneasy. And so maybe if you're watching at home and you're thinking, my family, has done well, that is absolutely fantastic. But we do want to make sure that, we are aware as our faith-based community about what are the needs in our community, what are people around us journeying through. So then we're able to be aware of that, be able to cater for people, love people where they're at, show mercy and grace to everybody. And so what does it look like to be sort of emotionally or physically or spiritually like tired, drained? What does that look like? How do you pick it up?
Look like?
Yeah, how do you pick it up?
So if I'm an individual, what am I looking out for?
What are you looking out for?
Yeah, like what are the red flags?
Yeah, because there might be someone here today who's like, I think I'm okay.
Yeah.
But what does it feel like?
Sure. I think it's going to vary for everyone, but I think in a broad sense, you might notice, you're just extra tired. You might feel like I've got to sleep, for a week. You might find I don't eat the way I used to, like my eating habits have changed. You might find that I just feel kind of flat, or just I don't have energy, I don't have motivation, I don't have that get up and go that I used to have. You might even physically feel it, like you might have that, your muscles might not just feel like they're working like they used to. Sometimes it even affects kind of, I guess, the way we think potentially. We might not be concentrating very well. Usually we could focus, but we find ourselves not being able to. Or we might be maybe extra irritable, or, things that didn't really bother us before, now all of a sudden they do. I think, and maybe that's a key almost, is that change.
Yeah.
Like I used to be kind of like this, and now this, this is bothering me now where it didn't before. And so often that's something to watch out for as well.
And is there a difference between, I know that I used to do big events every week, and I used to do, I run a youth ministry, and it's like there's kids everywhere and there's just all this stuff. And then going nearly 2 years without that, coming back, it was like, oh my goodness, there's people everywhere, and these are late nights and it's different. But what's the difference between going, oh my goodness, like I'm out of my normal routine and now I'm finding it difficult because it's just it's getting back into the rhythm and then going, actually, no, this is actually a red flag to say that is there a time difference? Like if you're saying that some people can get tired or feel emotionally sort of drained, but is it you feel that for a week and you should go see somebody, or is it like 2 months and you should go see somebody?
Yeah.
I think it's something to not jump into, but also not ignore.
Yeah, sure. Yeah.
So can you put a time frame on it? No, I don't think so.
Yeah.
But I think you can be aware if after, hey, this is ongoing.
Yeah.
And I'm not seeming to pick up after it all, And I would add things like you get disinterested.
Yeah, sure.
I used to be really interested in this and I'm not interested anymore. And even, if you're in a faith-based community, that sense of where does my faith fit in this? Do I trust, my faith? Do I trust what I trust?
Like that sense of, well, who am I now almost? Like it gets a bit challenged.
Yes,
or
it
you
does.
wonder about it, yeah.
Yeah, for sure. And I think as far as evaluating it, I think there's a natural, I don't know, but my observation of friends and people has been, wow, this is different, even getting back socially or running events or getting back into work. But then it gets back very quickly to the normal.
Yeah.
So if it doesn't, and you're saying, I just don't want to do this time and time again.
Sure.
Yeah.
Sure.
Yeah, I would call that sometimes, I don't like using jargon, but there's a functional impact. That means like it starts to impact how I socialise. It starts to impact how I go to work, or if I can go to work. It starts to impact my study, or it starts to impact my ability to do things. And so sometimes that's that flag to say, oh yeah, okay, this is, maybe I do need to talk to somebody.
Yeah, sure. Sure. So it's a little bit more than me just going, wow, I haven't done a big event in a while and I forgot what it's like being out till 1 o'clock in the morning and I think I'm getting older. Like, so it's just like, because that was definitely a shock coming back and going, whoa, forgot what we used to do.
Yeah.
I think the simplicity, I know just going and meeting, I remember I met a group of ladies for coffee and we're all going, this is really weird.
I've heard so many people say, I've forgotten how to socialise. I don't know how to talk to people anymore.
Yeah, that's what we said. Yeah. What do I do? And it's different to Zoom, being face-to-face and all that. Yeah, for sure.
So talking about the socialisation, socialising, sorry, how do we build social resilience and like that sense of connection, belonging, support, and recovery after coming out of lockdown? There's definitely been times where you've met up with someone in a cafe and then you're like face to face, you're like, what do we now say? Like, how's this conversation? How do we start to build our resilience in that area?
Yeah, I think acknowledging that it's a bit harder is one thing, and just acknowledging that. And I heard this great bit of advice, which was, rather than just total disconnection, which is kind of, sometimes we feel like that might be the solution. I'm just not going to go,
Yeah.
But rather than that, still staying connected, but maybe you go for half an hour instead of the usual thing, or in a community setting, maybe you maybe you once served, or you served in this capacity, maybe you reduce that role, but don't completely go, I'm not going to show up at all.
Yeah, sure.
So keeping that aspect of connection, I think, is helpful.
Yeah. So continue to build those muscles instead of completely going and straining yourself.
Sure.
Just going, hey, we're going to build this up over time.
Yeah.
That's good.
I like this concept about social resilience, and I had to really think about it in light of this. But I came across a definition which isn't quite what I thought, and it was the ability to tolerate, absorb, cope with, and adjust to threats.
Yeah, great.
And I thought, wow, that's what happened during all the lockdowns. Mm-hmm. How do we absorb, how do we tolerate, cope with, and adjust to the perceived threat of punishment or illness or whatever? And I thought that was really challenging. And then I read, you need the group or the team and individuals, so a mixture, enabled to work and think and excel.
Yeah, that's cool.
Yeah, I've heard some people put it too in the sense that it operates at a personal level, a family level and a community level, which, speaks to what you're talking about.
I said it in reverse.
Yeah.
But I also read this and I thought, wow, this applies to us just engaging and being with each other. And it was healthy, socially connected, prepared people lead to stronger communities, and which then leads to withstanding, managing, and recovering from disasters.
Yeah, wow.
Yeah.
And I thought, so then the question arose in me, how do we connect and prepare people for not the doomsday gloom, but to make a stronger community that then enables us to withstand and recover from disasters.
So instead of us having a conversation about building resilience after, lockdown and restrictions, it's how do we build resilience now so no matter what comes our way, we can actually
bounce back.
Continue to bounce back.
Yeah. And a related thing to that is there's in the research there's this concept of post-traumatic growth, they call it.
Oh, wow.
So
Great.
it's not to say that we should all experience traumatic things because you can grow without those, of course, but there is some evidence around, that people can come out of disasters or traumas and have a growth thing in terms of their how they see life spiritually, how they what their goals are, their priorities are, their appreciation for certain things. And so I think that's there's a learning that can come also that makes you more resilient as an individual potentially, or at a community level. Yeah,
and that's definitely a biblical principle as well. With suffering is a key part of discipleship, following Jesus, taking up your cross, following him. But also Paul says it multiple times, or a couple of times in letters, talking about how persecution, suffering, hope, endurance. So it's definitely a biblical principle as well, which is really cool. But what are some of the dangers danger is probably a bit of a dramatic word, but what some of the effects maybe of if we are feeling like we're socially isolated or we're drained or we're not doing well with our mental health, what are some of the flow-on effects of us not dealing with it? So if just say hypothetically I'm feeling really not well, what are the flow-on effects? Because I know you touched on it before about talking about functionality or something.
The function.
Like what are some of those things? Like, and how does it affect our relationships? And what happens if we ignore this stuff?
I think some of the those red flags we talked about, like irritability, for example. I mean, that's the kind of thing that can potentially get in the way of relationships. If we feel a bit, I don't know what the word would be, a bit flat. Sometimes the tendency or the urge can be to withdraw, like we've been talking about. So we might actually kind of shut ourselves off from other people. So of course that has an impact then on the relationship, the degree of connection or intimacy.
I think too that sometimes you become more self-focused rather than other awareness.
Sure.
And there's a really good, healthy balance between being a bit self-focused and to identify and admit whatever. But when it starts to isolate you, as you said, you lose that ability to gain help, to give help, to be help, to receive it. Yeah. And I think...
which is a good point, because one of the things, like there's a group called the Resilience Project, and so they've done some work in schools and different places, And that's one of their key things is about doing something kind for somebody, you know.
Yeah.
Fostering empathy and kindness is really protective for mental health.
Yes.
And so is gratitude, and so is kind of just centering yourself in the present rather than thinking about too far ahead or regrets or things. Yeah.
And I use an analogy because I think if you keep it in and you try to put the lid on it, if you like, I just see that eventually it'll just explode. Somehow. Maybe big or little, but it has to come out because we're not made to keep our emotions within. We're made to express them appropriately, but the good, the bad and the ugly. To be able to say, I feel really angry. To be able to say, wow, I'm so happy.
So that's the double impact of disconnecting with community and other people. Then is you have less opportunities to, in a healthy way, express, you know, what's going on emotionally.
Yeah.
And how do we manage this? Because, like, I'm single, I live at home. But what about people who are parents and they may be struggling and they've got to also care for people like their children or, you know, their partners? How do we manage this sort of thing?
It's a good question. I think it's one that heaps of people really struggled with. I heard this analogy. I think someone told me one time a while ago. It's like if you're in a boat and someone's drowning, you know, you can only pull them in if you're in the boat. If you're in the water with them, you know, you're not. You can't help them. You can't support them.
Good analogy.
And so there is. It feels almost like we don't have time, or maybe it even feels a bit selfish, or you feel a bit guilty about looking after your own mental health or your own self-care we talk about, but it's quite important to make it a priority so you are available to, you know, like we can't give what we don't have. So if you haven't done something to top yourself up in a mental, emotional, spiritual way, then it's hard to then give out of a dry well or whatever analogy you want to use.
Yeah. I think more and more I'm becoming aware it's actually okay to be real. And often in a faith-based community or a work environment or whatever, there's a fear that if I'm real, I will be judged in a negative way. I'll be perceived as
like I should just cope.
And inadequate, not good enough. You know, I've got to be on top of my game for everybody. And I think to be real, but I will qualify this, I don't think you blab it everywhere.
Safe people.
So I think in order to be real, you've got to start looking and saying, what's going on in me? What am I feeling? Trying to identify some of the emotions and then share selectively. Like it's no good, I could come up to you, Shelley, and you go, oh yeah, so what? Or you could go, yeah, and walk away, and I think, you haven't even listened to me. So on the other side of it is to learn how to listen and to find people who will listen to you. But I always put a big proviso to listen without feeling you have to solve the problem. To listen because I just want to understand what's going on for you can be the best thing, to have someone listen to me because I just care enough to find out what's going on with me. Not because, well, you should do this and you need to do this and your faith says do this and why aren't you doing that? Because then I go, you're not listening. You're just trying to, what's the word, direct, guide.
Palm you off.
Give me the solution.
And often you don't need the solution because I do think that often the solution is actually within you. And as a faith person, you pray, you seek what you do, but I think you find the solution by, first of all, identifying, being real and expressing it appropriately.
Especially if you're a verbal processor, being able to talk it out with somebody. And that's actually one of the steps for Are You OK Day, asking if someone's okay. One of the big steps is listening, making sure we're listening, and we're listening properly, because like you said, it's just giving that opportunity for someone to be able to process maybe even what they're feeling, because they might just need that.
But even, I think you've brought up a really good thing. For those who aren't verbal processors, who may draw. And I know sometimes people draw the most dark, horrific images or pictures or whatever, draw, paint, whatever. But to sit with them and find out what's going on for them, not to judge it.
It's more about expressing it in the way that you express it, as opposed to it has to be expressed a particular way.
Yeah, for sure.
There you go. And do you guys have any practical tips for how we can rebuild our resilience?
Multiple.
Yeah, where to begin? I think connection with community is so important. Like the research says that people that are connected with, like time and time again, people that are connected in some sort of community, they are more resilient. They have less chance of some sort of mental health. I mean, most people have a mental health problem at some point, or maybe half. But being connected to community is very protective. So that's one. You want a tag team?
Well, I think it's all about doing, rather than sitting back and expecting others to do for you. And so I think, yes, community. I think, yes, develop self-awareness. Taking a bit of time to look after yourself and say, what do I like doing? You know, and I'm thinking perhaps of mums or parents or, well, even youth who may be so busy giving out that they don't stop to say, you know, I like to go for a walk, or I like to go to the pool, which obviously couldn't in lockdown, or I like to draw. And setting aside and giving yourself permission to look after yourself a bit.
Yeah, I could give you a few little real simple ones, which are like like you were saying, do something with someone you like, you know, go for a walk. And then they say 20 minutes of exercise a day is just as good as an antidepressant, right? So just go for a walk. It could be look at your routine. Like our routines got so out of whack and still are a lot with COVID, and so just trying to get a regular bedtime that kind of works. Something as simple as that. Check your diet.
Your screen time.
Yeah, screen time.
TV, that sort of thing.
Yeah.
Because that can be actually very overwhelming. Is the restriction that we don't fully understand, but they're gaining more understanding of screen time. What it does to the brain just in the blue light and that, plus just it isolates you. You know, the people who get hit by a car because they weren't aware.
Yeah, and I think another analogy, like we talk about physical health, right? And we plan to go to the gym and we set these things up. Well, mental health's no different, you know, it takes that action you were saying. And so like doing some of these things rather than kind of being kind of that victim, kind of it's just happening to me kind of mindset.
Or it's all too hard.
Yeah.
You know, that can
it's
be
important.
something. And look, for some, I'm really aware there's a financial constraint, and to be able to say, okay, even if you do have financial challenges, you can still get out and go for a walk. Or you can still sit in a park and, if you like it, you know, look at a tree or a flower or watch people.
Have a laugh with
Have
someone.
a laugh.
That's a good
I
one.
love these groups that go and you laugh for half an hour. You know, the high laugh, the low laugh. If you've ever tried it, it's a really funny thing to do. And make yourself laugh.
Yeah, sure.
And even check some of those things that have crept in over COVID. Like, you know, if I notice just my eating habits are just way out of whack, or maybe I'm drinking something, you know, like to help me to sleep or something like that, you know. And checking some of those things and going, I don't need that anymore.
That's good. That's good. And what help is available, and how do we access it? Yeah.
Good question.
I think because this is coming from City Life Community Care offers a lot of help, from counselling, psychologists, to welfare help and support, financial support. And, you know, it's a wealth of resource that is able to be tapped quite easily. And so from that, yes, counsellors, psychologists.
Yeah, well, and of course you've got, you know, friends, family, your usual supports.
But if they need a bit of extra support,
or
they go, this is time for maybe me to see a professional.
So in Victoria, there's also a service, Head to Health. It's a website. That's there's City Life Community Care. There's also this. It's just kind of like the Victorian sort of triage, to use a medical term, but they have people that are basically trained to know what kind of service might be helpful and can often point you in the right direction. Or your GP is another person that you can talk to about options as well. Yeah.
And I do want to say, if you do take up that offer and go and seek help, but, you know, you have an appointment or a session and you go, oh, you know, don't like her, she's got grey hair or something. That's fine. Don't give up. There will be someone else that you will find you can connect with.
Yeah, sometimes it takes a little bit to find the right fit.
Yes.
Yeah, great.
And I know financially, if you're in stress, City Life does give help.
Sure.
And assistance to those. And I am sure other people do, or other places do as well. So don't give up. Look at your don'ts and find there is a way to overcome them.
Great. And can I ask, Scott, are you able to help explain what mental health plans are from a GP? Because there would definitely be people out here who have not heard of that before, and how to get access to a psychologist.
So it's under what they call the Better Access Scheme. It's basically a GP does a plan, a mental health treatment plan, and it gives a certain number of rebates that cover some of the cost. So usually you can get, most of the time, 10 sessions with a rebate through that system. At the moment, at least till the end of the year, there's more. There's 20 at the moment, which is an extra.
In a year?
Yeah.
20
as part
in a year.
of the COVID, there's an extra additional.
Is that just Victoria, or is that Australia-wide?
It's Australia-wide.
Wow. So people who are watching from interstate, there you go.
And there's sometimes there's you normally check in with the GP along the way.
Sure.
As part of that. And it's like a collaborative effort, I suppose.
So just to clarify, that's you go and get a mental health plan, and then you get subsidised. It's like a Medicare rebate on seeing a psychologist, but there still is sometimes an out-of-pocket fee. Is that correct? But it's very subsidised.
So they give a big chunk.
But again, you're not locked into a person. If you find you don't connect well, that's fine. Find someone you connect with who you feel will listen, but also...
Sometimes the GP will have like recommended people, but you don't have to go with them. You can, you have choice.
Yeah, that's great. That's great. And can I ask the difference between your counsellor, a psychologist, and a psychiatrist? Because sometimes it can be very overwhelming. Because it's like, what do I need?
It's always such a tricky question. The easier part is counsellors and psychologists compared to psychiatrists. Psychiatrists are doctors, they're medically trained, so they do medication, whereas psychologists and counsellors don't. I would say, we were talking about this before, but psychologists probably have a bit more of a sort of a medical model, a medical sort of framework. That's why the GPs maybe we connected with a bit more, perhaps, whereas counsellors are...
Counsellors are more relational, I think, and we're not... Well, we don't focus on a diagnosis. We don't ignore if somebody has one, but we don't label or diagnose as such. Well, that's the goal. And I'm not saying psychologists do, but psychologists are more... Well, they're qualified to offer a diagnosis. I think.
Yeah.
Awesome.
We find it hard too.
It varies too between who you see. Some have
Yes.
more of an emphasis than others. I know of psychiatrists that don't do medication, for example. They do therapy, which is very similar to ours. So it gets a bit grey.
Okay,
Yeah, definitely.
Very good. Good to know. Thank you guys so much for making it today. We really, really appreciate that. And we trust that there's something that you've gotten out of that today. Just want to let you guys know, City Life Community Care, you can Google us, you can contact us. We would love to hear from you. There's also a great website called Beyond Blue for more information as well. And also the Are You OK Day website. A couple of action points at home. If you are not doing well, please speak to somebody. Take a step today. It could be by reaching out and emailing City Life Church or City Life Community Care, or it could just be calling maybe a parent, a neighbour, a friend, someone to help you. And then also the second thing is, if you are doing okay, maybe you could ask somebody else how they are doing for Are You OK Day. And thank you guys for joining us.
You're welcome.
Yeah, no worries.
Thanks for having us.
We trust that you enjoyed that conversation. And just a reminder, if you have any questions that you would like to ask, please feel free to leave them in the comments, either on YouTube or on Facebook, because we are actually getting to those live. Unfortunately, we weren't able to get Pat back tonight, but we do have Scott with us, a clinical psychologist. And so we have been receiving your questions. And the first one here is, what support services are available for emergency or first responders? And in particular, is there something available for those who are maybe retired and are still working through any kind of trauma?
So it's a good question. And sometimes first responders, they have a tough job. Sometimes it gets a little bit, can be a little bit forgotten. A lot of organisations will have their own services. So most of emergency services, if they're still working at the very least, would have their own places that they can contact. I often, for first responders, often because of the things they've seen, there can be a kind of like trauma kind of stuff. And so the Phoenix Australia is Australia's Centre for Excellence on PTSD. So they're a really good spot, and they have a responder section there, and you can actually get in touch with those guys. They have a phone line that you can contact and talk to people about options. So I'd often go there as a first point of call, and I think that they would be able to support people even though they might not be active in service. And we've also got, there's services at some of the hospitals, for example, that specialise in that aspect as well, which are a really great resource.
Yeah, it's great. Yeah, it's also really good to sort of just acknowledge the fact that we do have first responders who do have a lot of things that they see that are quite traumatic, and just because they're not currently working in the field doesn't just diminish the fact that there still may be lots of trauma from things that have happened to them in the past. Yeah, and
absolutely.
Yeah. The second question that we have tonight is about youth mental health, and it's in regards to, or asking around year 12s. How do you best support someone who's in year 12 who might be finding everything a little bit too overwhelming?
I'd say first off to let them know they're certainly not alone. It's a really common time that young people might seek some support, particularly VCE. There's a lot of pressure. And so I'd start with that. A lot of the schools have their own welfare departments, and those can be a really valuable resource. If I was a parent supporting someone in year 12, I think, parents do such a great job of just supporting their kids to get through this period, making sure there's a ready supply of food and nutritious sort of brain food is good. I think making sure, I've seen a lot of times as parents, you obviously want the best for your kids, and so sometimes there can be a bit of pressure, and sometimes it's actually more helpful to make sure too that that you give your child enough space to kind of go do some fun stuff, not just study, like 24/7, but do some stuff that's going to recharge their batteries, hang out with their mates, go I don't know, go for a walk or do something that gets them out, gets them moving, and some of those kind of things would be, some of my suggestions. Yeah.
Because Year 12 was really stressful for any student, and then to sort of, have that pressure sometimes from home as well can be really overwhelming. But if you need Friday nights, come to Epic Youth. We've got you covered. We have the snacks too, so it's good. Yeah, very good, very good.
Good.
And then another question is, how can parents help their children to develop resilience? Like, is that something you teach kids, or is it something they naturally learn?
Yeah, I think there's definitely a bunch of things, and it starts from really early.
Yep.
Some people might have heard the phrase helicopter parenting, like that. You might have seen someone do this, sort of hang, at the playground maybe, or somewhere. They're kind of hanging around, oh, that looks a bit dangerous, or the research says that that's not really helpful in the long run. It's well-meaning because you want to keep your kids safe, but things like that where it's sending the message rather than, or you can't do that, or you shouldn't do that, or rather trying to catch yourself in that and giving an alternative message, which is, no, you got this, you can do this, you can push the envelope. So I think starting early in that way.
Yep.
The Resilience Project website has a bunch of resources on this, and they talk a lot about gratitude and empathy, being really present, and emotional literacy is a few things that you can impart to your kids. Emotional literacy, it's really about helping kids to describe their emotions and try to make sense of it for them, because it can be confusing. So I saw one exercise on that website that said, at dinner time, ask your kids how their day was. Ask them, was there anything that got them really annoyed today, or really angry, or really sad, or anything like that? What was it? And talk to them about what helped.
Yeah.
Something like that. You can start to build that emotional language, and we know from research that if you can describe your emotions, if you can put language around it, that helps.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
That's awesome. We had my niece and nephew were living with us for a little while, and I remember reading them books, and she had this whole books on, like, I feel sad, I feel this, I feel that, and I'm thinking, what is this? And then she would sit there and she'd go, I feel sad today, and I'd be like, I think it's just because she read the book, but it wasn't. It was actually her articulating, giving language to how she was feeling at just such a young age. And that's good to know that that's healthy for them. It wasn't just a strange book that she wanted to read, at night. She would choose one emotion. I'm thinking, what is this? So that's really good.
Yeah. Well, it helps with the language and other things too. There's even like some great apps. Someone told me about this one called Finch the other day. It just gives little prompts, little nudges here and there saying, hey, you should go for, I don't know, do 5-star jumps or something, stuff like that. Or there's a bunch of apps that are great for some kids as well. Yeah,
that's great. And then we've got another question come through, and it's, what are some of the best ways to maintain your mental health when you have a disability? Because it can be a bit of an overload when you get a diagnosis. So what are some of the things that you can do to maintain your mental health when you have a disability?
Yeah, I think it's a really good point, because there is a really high prevalence, unfortunately, with mental health challenges and disability, so physical disability. And so I think firstly acknowledging that's an important component. And a lot of people that get fantastic treatment for their physical disability, the mental challenges kind of sometimes can get missed. And so making sure that that's part of treatment in a holistic kind of way, like you can have the other treating people on the same page, is often really useful. I would plug into the support network that you've got. You may even find people struggling with the same thing can be quite helpful to feel less isolated. And some people have amazing tips of how they coped with certain difficulties. And I suppose to some degree it probably depends on what the disability is.
Yeah.
I would say to because it can be probably overwhelming at times, and but to realise that you've survived a lot, you've come through a lot. You can do often more than maybe what you think you can, even with a disability. There's, don't fall into that, get sucked into that trap of being the victim in it.
That's fantastic. And I like how you just said, realising that there's sort of two things going on, because sometimes it can get missed. Because it's like if you have a broken engine and like flat tyres, you can change the tyres, but if your engine, your car still isn't going to run properly. And so it's going, awesome to realise there's two things that are going on. And I like that, And acknowledging that and being kind to yourself, be kind to yourself. And you've got lots of strength.
And they're absolutely connected. So, helping one can help the other,
Yeah, that's awesome. I think we've got time for another couple more questions. Again, if you have any questions, pop them in the chat. We'd love to answer them. What are some good ways to encourage others to get help? Because that actually can be really overwhelming, especially if they haven't asked for help. Is it rude to go and say to somebody, maybe you need help? How do you encourage them to do that?
Yeah, I think ultimately, I think most people would say that if they're going to ask a question like that, it's because they care for the person.
Yeah, absolutely.
And they love the person.
Yeah.
And so I would acknowledge that for starters. I think also it's important to acknowledge that ultimately, we can have some great advice sometimes. We can have the best intentions, and sometimes really people do need to choose to get the support, and they might not always be ready for that. But don't forget that you're probably planting a seed.
Yeah.
And don't forget too that you might notice some things that for people that are in the challenging situation or whatever it is, sometimes it can be a little hard for us to see it in the moment. So don't diminish what you're saying to the person as completely invalid, or, well, that didn't work and I'll just give up.
Yeah, sure.
I would say, keep supporting them, keep encouraging them, even just leave the door open and say, hey, I get it, okay, it's not something you want to look at now. If you want to come and chat anytime, you have my number, or you reach out.
Yeah, that's awesome. That's awesome. In terms of Are You OK Day, encouraging people to seek help is actually the third step in asking somebody how are you okay. The first step being asking them, are you okay? And the second step being listening. Third step being encouraging people to get help. And then the fourth step is to follow up with them. So I think that's really important. And if you are coming to any City Life Church services over this weekend at all sites, we will have out in our foyers stands for Are You OK Day, which have a whole bunch of resources on different numbers people can call, and also information about City Life Community Care, where you can come and see a counsellor, a psychologist, or somebody else who can refer you onto what you need. So, yeah. I think we might have time for another couple of questions. Are there any particular groups or people who are at an increased risk of developing mental health? Is it genetic or?
That's another good question. It's it can differ a little in my mind. I think of, there's these different kind of challenges people have.
Yeah.
And maybe unsurprisingly, different people groups at times, they have differing levels of risk depending on what we're talking about. So, for example, in depression, for example, there are groups that are a little more vulnerable to that, and it's different to, say, people that might be vulnerable to anxiety.
Sure.
So, for example, the prevalence of anxiety is higher in people with a European background.
Yeah.
There's a higher percentage of you're more likely in female to have maybe some anxiety challenges. Also, age group. I think the 18 to 29-year-old age group for mental health. I think you were saying the other day too. has a higher prevalence than, say, if you compare it to 60 plus kind of age brackets. And so there's quite a few factors, and definitely even people from different socioeconomic backgrounds, if they've experienced inequality, if they've experienced poverty, unfortunately some of those things mean that they might be, that there are higher prevalence rates in some of those communities. Yeah.
There you go. And what are some of the warning signs to watch for people with regards to depression? So does this vary between age groups, like we just touched about? But what are some of the warning signs then, or some of the signs to look out for to say someone in your family or one of your friends is maybe suffering from depression? Because obviously there's a difference between I had a bad day, or I broke up with a boyfriend, or I broke up with a girlfriend, or I lost my job, and I'm a reasonable level of sad, and then actual sort of depression.
Yeah. There is a.
Sorry, I asked you about 4 things in there.
Yeah, I mean, like most emotions, they ebb and flow, and they go up and down. When we're talking about depression, it's a longer term. It still tends to ebb and flow, but it tends to be over a longer period. And so.
And what would that period be?
It's usually like most of the criteria, I suppose, like for a couple of weeks. Most days. You'd be feeling flat or really low energy, or really maybe sad for most of those days, on most days, for that 2-week period. Signs, if I was, say, a family member looking out for somebody, or a friend perhaps, one is social withdrawal, one is you lose the enjoyment that you used to get from certain things. So people that become a little bit, a bit more withdrawn, and some of those things, things to watch out for.
And over a longer period of time, So hypothetically, like, your friend broke up with their boyfriend, and they've been sad for a while, and it's because of something.
Sure.
When would then be a time to start to sort of worry or have a concern?
Yeah, because there is that.
Because
there's a part that's normal human experience, isn't it? And similar if in the grieving process too. I would say one is, if it's starting to get in the way of life.
Yeah, sure.
Or if it feels like it's sticking around just more than what you think, those would be the times. But if it's starting to get in the way of you being able to attend school or see people socially, or it's starting to impact your relationships with your family, or these kinds of things, that would be a good time to say, hey, are you okay?
Are you okay?
Yeah.
That's good. Thank you. I think we can have one last question. This is a good one. They were all good, but can mental health conditions be a lifelong journey of management? And can some be like, I don't know what that word is, but it's a very big word. Episodic? Mm-hmm. Oh, episodes.
Yeah.
Sure. Maybe I just need glasses now. And sort of, or ones be more chronic and long term.
Yeah, it's probably a both and situation. Yeah, for sure. Even thinking of, if we use depression as an example, there's major depressive episodes. So by their nature, they tend to increase in over maybe weeks or months, and then they do tend to subside at some point. There's also longer term versions of depression. There's even seasonal kind of versions. So like people in the UK, for example, that get a really long winter, you get that seasonal depression or seasonal affective disorder. So there's definitely, so it's both. There are also people that do tend to have some trouble for a long while, there are certain difficulties that maybe they stick around for years, but sometimes they do reduce in severity, intensity over a period of time, over different life stages even. And I'd encourage people to, some people they get maybe a treatment, or they try to work things out in a certain way, and they do it for years and years and years, but they don't really they don't do a check-in sometimes either, and they don't reevaluate or reassess. Oh, is this working?
Yeah, sure.
And so even thinking about, well, maybe I should check this out. I haven't thought about that for a while. Maybe I should go and kind of get it checked out a bit more. So that can be another thing to think about. Yeah.
That's awesome. That's good. That's good. So some things can be a lifelong, and some things as both and, isn't it?
Yeah.
Awesome. Thank you, Scott, so much for joining us tonight. Yeah, we appreciate it, and we appreciate your wisdom. And we appreciate everyone who has been sending in their questions as well. This has come to the end of our webinar, and we just want to say thank you. But also just remind you that if you do need any help or any extra support, we have City Life Community Care. We would love to hear from you. All you need to do is Google that, and we'll pop the number in the chat as well. And then there's things like Lifeline and Beyond Blue, and there's a whole bunch of different resources as well. We hope you have a great rest of your night, and we'll hopefully see you soon.